Hey everyone, we've got the blockbuster news today. The deadly weapon that almost got Nick was actually a German pistol. Nick couldn't help but laugh. The reason is he has an identical pistol in his drawer, a family heirloom from his dad. Clearly, the culprit is not only familiar with the surroundings, but might also be hiding in the mansion. However, to find the real killer, we need to grill each suspect one by one. So, with Poirot's encouragement, Nick decided a grand party, inviting all the strangers. Of course, Cousin Maggie was included, and Nick decided to scrutinize everyone, trusting his grey cells for clues. However, that night, Nick's red cloak stole the spotlight. Hastings was also in the audience. Truly, each character is something else. Just wearing a horse blanket can grab attention. But with no leads, Poirot and Hastings prepared to call it a day, only to find someone sprawled out in front of the mansion when family members helped her up. They were shocked. She was draped in Nick's red cloak. At that moment, it was like Poirot's head got hit by lightning. Clearly, the murderer was aiming for Nick, but Maggie mistakenly wore the cloak and became the scapegoat. This means the killer must be among the crowd, but Poirot couldn't figure out who the mastermind was for now. So, Poirot declared the mansion unsafe, decided to send the injured to the hospital, and keep an eye on the police investigation. No one could leave without his say-so. After leaving the premises, Hastings reported to Poirot the police's conclusion, claiming the killer was possibly a deranged vagrant. Poirot snorted in derision. Regardless of how run-down the Cliff mansion is, it's not for just anyone to stroll in. Poirot steadfastly believed the killer must be someone close to Nick. The next morning, Poirot found Hastings again. After a night of deep thinking, he felt even more suspicious of the simplicity of the man. He promptly and without hesitation threw out 3 questions. Clearly, Hastings was deeply stumped by Poirot's inquiries. Hastings' answers, while reasonable, couldn't hold in this case, especially with Maggie wearing Nick's cloak. Was it truly because she couldn't find her own clothes, or was there more to it? Poirot started to think Nick was far more complicated than he appeared, so he decided to visit Nick. Turns out it was worth the trip. Nick dropped a bombshell. He couldn't sleep all night, not because of Maggie's death, but because his fiancée had recently passed away. And that person was the super-rich Michael from yesterday's party, and the news was bombarding with that same story. Michael had an unfortunate aircraft mishap, and everyone assumed he was definitely a goner. But Nick, however, thought differently. He firmly believed his fiancée was still alive until the fateful phone call shattered his last hope. This also explains why Nick switched from the fiery red cloak to a simple white shawl. He wanted to quietly mourn for his late fiancée. As for why they couldn't go public, it's because Michael's uncle never approved of Nick, and they didn't want to part ways. So they chose to live as fiancés, thinking they could be open after marriage, but the twist of fate derailed their relationship. Initially, Nick didn't want to confess, but after some internal struggle, he finally opened up. Michael's death hit him hard, leaving him anxious and unable to eat a bite. But after some contemplation, he decided to spill the beans to Poirot, connecting the dots to the clues he had gathered. Poirot finally had an epiphany. If Michael had left her while leaving all his assets to his fiancée, then the killer's target was not the Cliff mansion, but a fortune that could drive someone mad. This also explains why the killer had several attempts on Nick's life. Now, they needed to confirm the existence of that. If the beneficiary is Nick, he is likely the killer. But just as Poirot and Hastings rushed to investigate, they ran into George on the way. Poirot deliberately dropped the secret news about Nick's fiancée to gauge George's reaction, and after some probing, Poirot quickly ruled out George as a suspect. That day, Freddie happened to walk by and asked George for a watch. Hastings immediately recognized it as the same one he had seen earlier. He recalled the watch was accurate. Why repair it? Freddie said the big buckle on the strap broke. Poirot vaguely sensed something was off about the watch, but didn't think too deeply at the time. Instead, he and Hastings started rummaging through Nick's stuff. Although they didn't find the will, they stumbled upon a surprise, a private letter from Freddie to Michael in the drawer. In the letter, Michael warned her to stay away from dangers. Poirot deduced her friend used drugs. The letter was dated February of last year. Could this mean Freddie knew about Nick and Michael's relationship long ago? Besides, the boss mentioned a secret spot in the mansion where the owner often stored important items, but he didn't know the exact location. Since they couldn't find any clues here, they turned to the bedroom, unexpectedly discovering love letters between Nick and Michael there. Initially, Poirot, being the gentleman, didn't want to pry into others' privacy, but after some thought, he figured these letters just might hold the key to solving the case. So, he and Hastings supervised each other, only looking at the contents related to the case, and they truly made significant finds. Someone said I should be good. Thanks, friends. I sent half the records to Aldwaite. Oh, your name's Mark. I'm really smart. A couple of friends confirmed it, so you were right. I did a good deed. With rock-solid evidence gathered, the killer came after Michael's huge inheritance. That's why they kept showering Nick with affection. Now they just need to find who benefits most from Nick's death, the killer. Nick had said he'd leave the mansion to cousin Charles. And since Michael mentioned it in his letter, as a lawyer, Charles should be the best candidate. Could it be that his suspicion is the highest right now? But after questioning, Charles claimed he had never received any letter from Michael, and he didn't even believe in the will Nick had mentioned. Now that's a problem, because Poirot had clearly asked Nick before, and he asserted that the yearning couple sent the will to Charles. To find out who was lying, Poirot and Hastings rushed to interrogate the yearning couple, but the cousins playing dumb about not receiving it only made him look more suspicious. Just when the investigation hit a snag, bad news came from the hospital. Nick was nearing the end. Poirot rushed to the hospital in a panic, but unfortunately, he was too late. Nick had already succumbed to his poisoning. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's more exciting content waiting for you to discover.